How did the AC just turn on? I literally turned it off. I am so confused. Welcome to Forsaken by Shadows, a story by Sarah Danielle. Previously on Forsaken by Shadows, from Tiana's point of view. Everything has been so depressing and scary lately, and I just can't wait to forget about it all with one of my favorite events, the festival. And this year, instead of working with my father for most of it, I've been assigned a better task. Take Rizman around and make sure he is having a good time. And the same with Mazira, once we are done with the serenade. And I am so excited. I have it all planned out, and even some special surprises in store for Rizman. I don my festival best, fix my hair and makeup just right. And Rizman is still in the shower. What is he doing in there? It's not like he has long, luscious locks of hair to wash like the rest of us. So I pound on the door before he uses all the charges on our enchanted waterstone, and he finally trudges out to get ready. But apparently, no one has clued him in on how we dress for the festival. Poor thing. I almost pity him. He can't even look at me when he comes to ask about what he's supposed to be wearing, and it's adorable. But when he finds out the truth, he throws a tantrum, and I should have seen it coming. Complaining is what Rizman does best. He never wants to do anything unless Mazira is involved. And I maybe get a little annoyed with him. In fact, I accidentally tell him off for his attitude. And while I do feel a little bit guilty afterward, it works. And he lets me do his hair. I should threaten to cry more often. But anyway, reluctant or not, we head to the festival and everything is going just the way I planned. Rizman might even be having fun without Mazira for once. Although it's hard to say, because just when we start talking about me and my concerns, and the reasons why I didn't ascend to the serenade, he makes it about Mazira. Always about Mazira. And I get it. He's in love, and I normally think it's cute. But we were talking about me for once, and it kind of hurt to have him just stop caring so quickly. Luckily, we arrive at my father's tent, so I can ignore him until I feel better, while Rizman learns what it is my father does each festival year. I leave them to talk and wander the displays, until my father calls me back, declaring it's time to go to the temple. And this is the crown jewel of my plan, my surprise for Rizman. Because he thinks we're going to have to stand in the crowd and watch the serenade from a distance. He doesn't know Mother Lara invites the city leaders and their families to watch the serenade from her terrace. A perfect view from just above the stage. I bet he's glad he let me dress him now. He would have really stood out in Mother Lara's gathering without my guidance. I move to gloat about exactly that, but he catches me off guard, wanting to talk with me about why I was upset. It feels silly now, but before I can awkwardly explain, the music starts and the dance begins. And the look on his face when he sees Mazira was worth enduring all of his complaining. Forsaken by Shadows, Part 3, Where Shadows Linger. Chapter 28, Written in the Stars. Mazira. Just breathe. Mazira inhaled as her instructors advised her. One breath, then another, then a spin. Extend the blade, slash it left. Don't forget to exhale. Around her, 23 other blades sliced in the same direction, as her new song sisters twirled to the rhythm of the serenade, their voices raised in sacred song. 8 new initiates, and 16 rising to the next echelon. Could they even hear the music? Or were they like her, only aware of it from the thrumming in their bones? Were they cognizant of the sea of faces watching their performance? Or did they lose themselves to the dance, the way Mazira supposed she ought to have? Just breathe. At least it was almost over. Muscle memory alone carried her into the final steps, a moment of great anticipation for the other 7 novices. When the music stopped, they would learn if Elistrea had chosen them for magic. Not likely, since Mizira already had it. Elistrea seldom gave the gift to more than 1 or 2 novices at a time, preferring her acolytes to excel in swordplay over magic. Still, they could always hope. Or did they give up on hope and resent her, an unworthy half-fairy, for her gift instead? No, she wouldn't think that way. There'd been no evidence of bitterness or jealousy from her new drow sisters, no unkindness whatsoever. Mizira couldn't keep inventing what wasn't there. She just had to breathe and get through this dance, and then she was free to go. Free to find Risman and show him her lack of scars. Free to display what more the goddess had done for her, and maybe, she might just tell him everything. Not just about Elistrea and her visions, but about him, and the way he healed her heart and made her whole. The way she loved him to her core. Her face warmed, and not just because of the magic crackling just beneath her skin, coaxed forth by the sacred song and dance, or her ever-present awareness of the entire cavern watching her. Would she really do it? Was she really brave enough to face his rejection? She had a little time left before she would find out. The music came to a climactic finish, concluding with a forward lunge with the blade and a synchronized sheathing of weapons. The new priestesses rose and bowed, hands outstretched and palms held high in supplication. As she had known it would, Mizira's body erupted with white, sacred fire, bathing her in bright light and a gentle breeze. The sounds of the cavern came crashing back as she breathed a sigh of relief, unable to hold back her smile as she held the pose for the full 4 count, like they were instructed. Over. Free to go. Find Risman. The cavern shook with a collective gasp, and Mizira's head whipped up on instinct. That wasn't right. They were supposed to cheer. And then Mother Lara was supposed to speak and... Oh. She wasn't the only body blazing with sacred flame. Before her, the 16 newly raised second echelon clerics had broken rank, staring at one another with expressions of awe and fear, as every one of them blazed with magic they didn't previously possess. What does it mean? Stammered the girl to Mizira's left, drawing her attention to the remnants of the line of novices she stood with. They'd scattered as well, each one burning like a torch. Like Mizira, every single songblade on the stage had been granted access to the weave. A heartbeat hung suspended in time, but when it resolved, the cavern roared with the cheering Mizira had been expecting. It sounded distant and far away, like the music she'd been all but deaf to. She cast her eyes upward, to the balcony where Mother Lara watched the spectacle, and found the High Priestess staring down at them with a look that mirrored what Mizira was feeling. Shock and disbelief, and no small amount of fear. 24 priestesses gifted with magic. What indeed could it mean? A male elf leaned over and whispered something in Mother Lara's ear. A male? No, that wasn't some generic aide. That was Solarin, appearing strikingly different through the fog of her adrenaline, clad in his festival attire. And beside him was Tiana, and beside her, Mizira's breath caught in her throat as her eyes locked with Risman's. He leaned forward, gripping the railing of the balcony with a grim set to his jaw, and she flinched. That was hardly the look of delight she'd been hoping for. Was he upset with her? Had she done something to displease him? Her reeling was cut short as the Reverend Mother stepped forward, raising her hands for silence. "My children," she said, in a voice enhanced by magic. Mizira and the other girls stiffened to attention, gazing up at the woman who had founded their order. The words were part of the script, though the choreography was ruined by the shock of the Sacred Fire's manifestation. Yet though they had already moved from their postures of humility, Mother Lara's words didn't deviate from expectation. "Rise and be blessed," she said. She raised her arms and faced cavernward, and sweet music fell from her lips. 4 lines of sacred song, a benediction, which was soon taken up by all in the cavern. The chorus flooded in and around them, sending tingles rippling from Mizira's spine to the furthest reaches of her fingers and toes, which pulsed with tangible power, as though if she closed her fists, she could take hold of the weave as easily as one grabbed onto rope. But she didn't move. She just stood there, watching Mother Lara, searching for clues as to what she was meant to feel about what had just happened. When the lyrical blessing trailed away, the clamor of voices returned, and the musicians set their instruments aside. Sitara, who'd been lurking behind the colonnade, strode toward them, her grin wide. "Wonderfully done," said the commander of the Songblades. "I'm so proud of each of you." And it was over. Just like that. The ceremony had ended and the festival had resumed, and Mizira was supposed to just move on. As if something spectacular hadn't just occurred. As if their worship wasn't just rewarded with an unprecedented display of grace. For once, she wasn't the only one with questions. The newly risen Songblades, for that was what she was now, a Songblade, flocked around Sitara, several of them speaking at once. "What does it mean? We all have magic. Has this ever happened before?" Sitara made a shushing gesture, her wide grin still fixed in place. A grin that failed to reach her eyes. "Alestrea works in mysterious ways," she said. "We do not know yet why she has heaped such blessings on all of you, and we may never know, but this should be no cause for concern. You have all been gifted. This is marvelous. Rather than fretting, you should rejoice." Her words seemed to have a placating effect. The new priestesses exchanged glances, smiling to one another. Small, uncertain expressions that gradually resolved into grins. And rejoice they did, embracing one another and sharing words of delight. Mizira endured 2 hugs before she finally managed to slip to the edge of the gathering, which was growing as the musicians and more senior priestesses arrived to offer their own blessings and well wishes. She hugged her arms around her body as she cast furtive glances toward the others. Alestrea might work in mysterious ways, but Mizira couldn't shake the suspicion that if the goddess had chosen this many new wielders of magic, it could only be because the deity sensed they were all going to be needed. A trial was coming to Lana, one that was going to require healers and wielders. She shuddered, looked again to the balcony, and found no relief for her queasy feeling. Solarin and Mother Lara were still there, engrossed in what looked to be a serious conversation. Risman and Tiana, however, were gone. Where'd they gone? Where had Risman gone? She needed him now, her center, her solid ground. She needed him to confide her thoughts in, needed a steady assurance that everything was going to be okay. And he was gone. Wait, no, not gone. Down the stairs and into the temple. The only way he could go off the balcony. Probably on his way to her right now. Mizira wasn't patient enough to wait. She scurried to the stairs that led off the stage, unfortunately located at the front left corner, as far away from where she wanted to be as possible. The crowd in the cavern was transforming around her, as the Songblades melted back into it to greet friends and relatives, and the musicians repositioned themselves for the dancing that was about to take place. A whole red light of revelry and music, beneath the twinkling white lights of the courtyard, bewitched to mimic stars. Mizira had been looking forward to the dancing. She hadn't actually danced, sword dancing didn't count, since that awful night when her world became darkness. She'd had dreams of taking Risman's hands, of teaching him to sway the way he taught her to sword fight, but that was before this. Now she just wanted to get away with him, to go somewhere quiet and let him hold her until her fears were assuaged. "Mizira!" A hand caught her wrist just as her foot came down on the first step of the colonnade, and Mizira gasped. Her world spun, and she found herself in a crushing embrace, but it wasn't Risman's arms who had come around her. It was Valen, his familiar scent of sandalwood and spice triggering her recognition. The shock of his presence completely eclipsed her unease as she struggled to reconcile his sudden nearness with his long absence. They'd barely spoken since their argument in the same courtyard the cycle Mizira began her sword dancing class. Just cursory greetings and vague excuses about being busy that left Mizira drowning in regret, as though Valen was punishing her for choosing the Songblades over him, as though he wanted her to feel the way she had made him feel. And why shouldn't he? She deserved it, after all. Stars, but she had missed him. Not the way she missed Risman when they were apart, but enough to make her heart ache all the same. He held her tight and she returned his embrace, relishing the feeling of 10 days' worth of tension dissolving in one simple act of affection. Valen stepped back, his hand still on her bare shoulders, and all the world faded to just the pair of them. The noise in the crowd and music diminished by the brilliant light in his smile, his molten eyes reminiscent of the sun, or what she could remember of it. "You are incredible," Valen said, those same molten eyes following the plunge of her dress and rising again. "Just incredible." The color of Mizira's face mimicked her gown as she offered him a shy smile, subtly crossing her arms over her chest. Exposing her body to scrutiny had been the whole point of this design, but now that the rush of the dance was over, she wondered how soon would be too soon to change out of it and into her new mothwing robes. Valen, for his part, hadn't bothered to dress up for the occasion, clad in his usual earth-toned tunic and linen wraps. "Thank you," Mizira said, not really sure what else to say. "I mean it," Valen said, increasing the pressure on her shoulders just a little. "Look, Mizira, His words cut off as his eyes darted past her and narrowed. Mizira spun, fully expecting to see Risman approaching based on the look Valen wore, and had to swallow her disappointment when it was only Solarin. How had he gotten to her first, when last she saw he was still speaking to Mother Lara? Had Risman gotten lost, or had she been mistaken about his intentions? It didn't matter. Their eyes met, and Solarin's arms opened, and though he wasn't the elf she wanted to embrace, Mizira still moved to meet him, the twisting in her heart reminding her of the place of prominence he held within it. He wasn't Risman, but he was an acceptable substitute. "My dear child," Solarin said into her hair, stepping back much the way Valen had to take her in. Unlike Valen, however, his eyes never left her face. "Your performance was flawless. You should be proud. I know I am." Emotion tightened Mizira's throat, and she clung to him again. A knot that had snagged in her chest loosened, and she breathed a little easier. There were still many questions and even more concerns, but at least Solarin had deemed her performance worthy. Hopefully, Elistrea did too. "Thank you," she said, with more feeling than when she'd said it to Valen. She let him go and smiled, an uncommon expression, which had been excavated by his sure presence and deep affection. I think I am." "Good," Solarin said, and then his gaze shifted as Valen moved to stand beside her. Was it her imagination, or did some of the light in Solarin's eyes dim at the sight of him? "Ah, Valen, well met," the priest said, offering him his right hand to clasp. "We haven't seen you around lately." "Been busy," Valen said, in the guarded way he used when he offered Mizira the same two-word excuse. He accepted the hand of friendship offered him, but there was nothing warm in the exchange of pleasantries. "Well, not too busy for the festival," Solarin replied. "Are you enjoying yourself?" "Yeah," he said, still guarded as his eyes adhered themselves to Mizira. "I wouldn't miss this for anything." Roses bloomed on Mizira's cheeks, and once again, she regretted the design her past self had so boldly insisted on. It had all been meant for Risman. She hadn't thought about how anyone else's eyes might feel on her. "Solarin?" she asked, to escape Valen's burning stare. "Where is Risman? And Tiana, of course," she added hastily, lest she revealed too much of her heart all at once. "I thought I saw them with you." This time there was no mistaking it. Solarin's expression dimmed, his eyes flicking to Valen and back. "Ah, yes. They will come around shortly, I'm sure." His gaze wouldn't meet hers, and apprehension crawled its way back from the pit of her stomach. He was hiding something. "Now," Solarin said, before she could ask, "I must depart. I escaped Mother Lyra long enough to see you, but the excuse I used was to collect Satara. Our dear Reverend Mother will be expecting us back soon. Please, enjoy the festival, but not too excessively." He grinned, as though the fatherly instruction brought him great pleasure. "You do have temple duty in the blue light, after all." He started to turn away, but Mazira snatched his arm, holding him back. "Solarin, wait. Are you going to talk about what happened? On stage?" His beaming pride turned to indecipherable stone. "I am sure it was nothing more than the kind grace of our goddess," he said, laying a hand on her shoulder. "Do not let worry steal the joy of the cycle." He embraced her one last time and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, before slipping out of her grip and making his way towards Satara. Mazira watched him go, unable to take his words to heart. He told her not to worry, but how could she not? Something strange had happened, and they all knew it. She could really use Risman right about now. "How can you stand it?" Valen's voice cut through her foreboding, drawing her back to the moment in the busy temple stairs, a rippling ocean of people surrounding their quiet island. "Stand what?" she asked, glancing back at him, then froze. This couldn't be the same Valen who had snagged her in the crowd, the one who'd pulled her into a tight embrace and told her how incredible she was. That Valen had been bright and full of vitality, an allusion to the boy he was when they were small and unscathed by horror. The Valen who stood before her now seemed strained, his sun-kissed complexion now sickly pale. He wore age beyond his youthful years as he stared at her, thunderstruck. "You let them touch you," he said, but not as an accusation. He sounded genuinely mystified. "You let them kiss you," he added, his lips twisting around the word. His eyes roved through the crowd around them, wild and crazed. "How can you stand it?" "Valen," Mazira began, but faltered. What could she say to that? She'd told him time and time again how much the Zovars had done for her, how Solarin had become like a second father and Tiana the sister she'd never had, though she dared not use those exact familial terms to his face. If he still didn't understand, no amount of speaking about it would make him. She raised a tentative hand, wavering between laying it comfortingly on his shoulder and fearing her touch would set him off, like a wild beast on the brink of a rage. But her decision was made for her. Valen's hands went to his head, cradling his face as he groaned. "How do you survive down here?" Instinct overcame hesitation. Mazira went to him, draping her arms around his shoulders. "Valen, are you okay?" "No," came his muffled reply, the single word escaping as though choked through brambles. The sheer amount of agony in that one small syllable revived the tumultuous reeling she'd barely managed to silence on her own. She could definitely benefit from Risman's presence. Or Tiana's. Or even Solarin's. Yet they were surrounded by only strangers and acquaintances, all too absorbed in their own felicity to notice the brewing dismay. There was no one she could rely on, no one to draw courage from, no one she could lean on to handle the situation. Except herself. Gritting her teeth, Mazira tugged Valen toward the right side of the temple, where less people were treading. She guided him up the stairs and into the shadows of the marble columns, seating him on the steps. Her arms never left their circle around him. Valen's hands clung to his forehead, his breathing rapid and short. He looked for all the world the way Mazira felt just before panic seized her, before vivid recallings of her darker days flashed unbidden into her mind. "It's okay, Valen," she whispered over him, the way Tiana always did when Mazira woke from a dream terror. Her hands rubbed his shoulders, though her head reminded her it wasn't safe to touch a person suffering from such episodes, for either of them. But letting go felt wrong, and he didn't fight her closeness. If anything, he leaned into her, trembling as she murmured the refrains she had learned from her dark elven family. "It's okay. You're safe. You survived." After several long minutes, Valen let out a heavy breath and lifted his face, blinking rapidly as if becoming aware of the cavern for the first time. His eyes were reddened, but he'd held back whatever tears had wanted to fall. "I'm sorry," he croaked, as if the effort of speaking was too much for him. "It's just... gods. It's this place. I don't know how you can stand it. I don't know how you can stand them." Mazira flinched at the venom in his words, his hatred for the people she'd come to love pricking like paper cuts across her heart. "You haven't been here as long as I have," she said soothingly. "You haven't had the chance to get to know them the way I have." Valen barked a bitter, humorless laugh. "Yeah, thanks for the reminder. You're only here because they decided to make you a plaything and tortured you. How do you just get over that?" Chills clawed their way down her spine. She took her arms back as his sharp words cut into wounds that were still volatile, memories that remained fresh and dormant despite the layers of happy moments she'd heaped on top of them. Blood and knives, fists and pain. And that was just the beginning. There was no getting over what Teloriel had done to her. "You don't," she breathed, eyes stinging. "But getting over something and recovering aren't the same. Even war-torn fields can still bear fruit. The scars might remain, but life carries on." Valen made a non-committal sound, then stood abruptly, marching down 2 of the steps and pacing like a caged animal. "Every day I'm here, I'm reminded of that night," he said, his hands working as he spoke. "Every single day. I relive the murder of our families over and over. I see the raiders in the faces of those around us. I can hardly breathe down here. Everything now reminds me of then." Mazira sucked in a breath, her heart crumbling as though constricted by a vice. Platitudes rose to her lips, trite promises that everything would be okay, and that the people who had hurt them were far away, but she kept them to herself. What good were words against a torrent of hurt? "Everything now reminds me of then," Valen repeated, his pace slowing as he turned to face her. "Everything but you." Mazira frowned. Well, that didn't make sense. She was the only memory down here he could actually associate with the night of the raid. The only person who'd actually been there. "I know what you're thinking," he said. He moved up a step and knelt before her, so their eyes were on the same level. "You of all people should remind me most of what happened. But you don't. When I'm with you, I only remember the before. The years of our innocence. You bring me back to that summer we spent lost in the high forest. Or the autumn festival in Neverwinter. Or the druids we met on the way to Silvery Moon." Mazira's next breath came shuddering, as Valen listed memories she hadn't thought about in years. Not since she'd shared stories with Risman when they were very, very young. She'd all but forgotten about the druids, who had entertained them for a change with their magnificent transformations. Mazira had spent the rest of the journey to Silvery Moon determined to become a druid herself one day. Another dream long dead, withered like all the rest. So when I saw you in the courtyard, and you told me you wanted to be a cleric for her," he nodded at the temple behind Mizira, not bothering to mask his contempt for the goddess the building had been constructed for. I overreacted. Wait, what? I felt as though the drow were taking you from me too. Not in body, but in heart. And I said those cruel things to you. In the way I've been treating you since, cutting you off before you could cut me off. His calloused hands found hers, cradling them in his palms. "I'm so sorry, Mizira. I've been a complete ass. You didn't deserve it." "Valen," Mizira breathed, utterly taken aback. Wherever she had expected this conversation to go, it wasn't here. She had already accepted her guilt in their disagreement. She'd acknowledged that she had been self-absorbed, having not even considered him when she changed her routine. A routine he had become a part of. What kind of friend did that? And yet she couldn't quite bring herself to voice her protests. The same selfish part of her soul that had cut him out to begin with devoured his apology, applying it like her enchanted healing balm straight to the ache that had lingered since their disagreement. Valen let her hands go, moving to sit beside her. "Do you believe in destiny, Zizzy?" Mizira stiffened. There was that name again. That loathed childhood nickname he'd teased her with relentlessly, the one that had goaded her into rock-throwing. She didn't hate it so much anymore. "Destiny?" she repeated. I don't know. I've never really thought about it." Which wasn't entirely true. She'd thought about it a lot as a child, shivering in Teloriel's corner and wondering if her misery was preordained or a fluke. Had it been ordained, then she could hold on to hope that there had been a purpose, a reason for all the horrible experiences she'd been made to endure. By the time she left Menzo Baron's Inn, she'd long since stopped caring what force drove her footsteps, if any at all. No purpose could be great enough to justify her hurt, and believing in bad luck was easier than wondering which of the deities found pleasure in her pain. But her perspective was different now. She'd been privileged to experience her life with divine eyes, had been given access to insights beyond her wildest imaginings. Destiny and fortune seemed to intertwine seamlessly throughout her days, but to articulate her blossoming understanding of such an abstract subject was beyond her current abilities. "Well, I believe in it," Valen said. "Everything we do, every single step we take, is written in the stars." Stars? Mizira's furrowed brows lifted. How could the stars write her story, when their light couldn't reach beneath the earth? And why did they get a say in what happened in the world below them? "We're all just characters in the great story. We have roles we're meant to play, but when we try to break character..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "I thought when you chose this, you were breaking character." Mizira tensed again, bracing herself for his rejection, sliding a hand to her stomach where the silver moth brand reassured her she was doing the right thing. "But when I saw you on that stage, I realized how wrong I was." "What?" "I wasn't even going to come tonight," Valen continued. "I was so angry. But I felt it here." He thumped his chest. "I knew I had to come. It was written. So I came, and watched you dance, and realized I was the one trying to break the story by talking you out of yours. Gods, Mizira, can you forgive me?" "Of course I can," Mizira said, though more out of obligation than understanding. What did she have to forgive him for, when he'd only been trying to help her? Though if she were honest, she wasn't sure she was following his logic. All this talk of destiny and story seemed deeply flawed, not because she didn't believe in a greater purpose to their existence, or that the hands of higher powers influenced and shaped their world, but to have every single moment decided for them, To be living their lives like players on a stage, as scripted as the dance she had just completed? That didn't feel right, either. But who was she to tell Valen what he should believe? He accepted her now, for exactly who she was. Or at least, who she was trying to be. The least she could do was listen and try to understand. His hand found hers again, lacing their fingers together, and he squeezed. "You have no idea what those words mean to me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I believed it was my destiny to come here and help people. I wanted to save people from drow the way we were never saved. I haven't done anything like that yet, but I'm starting to think." His gaze found hers, and the intensity she saw there stole her breath. "Perhaps my story brought me here for another reason." Oh, no. Warning bells clanged in her head. Mizira had seen that look before, the one that lit fires in his irises. The same intensity, the same smoldering Risman had gazed at her with the night she'd been certain he was going to kiss her. Though Risman hadn't kissed her. But she wasn't convinced Valen wasn't about to try. He raised a hand and tucked a stray curl behind her ear. Her pulse quickened, and his eyes dipped to her lips. Panic sent her rocketing to her feet. "Let's dance, Valen," she said, blurting off the first excuse that popped into her head to ruin whatever moment he was aiming for. Maybe she was overthinking it, arrogantly assuming he had any interest in kissing her, but she really didn't want to find out the hard way. "Dance?" Valen repeated, blinking as though coming out of a trance. "Yes," Mizira said, gesturing to the people who had turned the courtyard into a dance hall. "Like we used to. Before." His expression darkened as he gazed out at the celebration. "I haven't danced since that night." Just like her. "Well," she said, her heart thumping wildly against her ribs as she resisted the urge to step further away from him. "Maybe it's time you danced again. Look, I don't know anything about this great story or star writing, but I do know this. We aren't made for the shadows, Valen. We've been robbed of what we should have had, but we're alive." She thought of the vision she'd had, of Elistrea and Coralon standing over his catatonic body as their wagons burned, taking note of their small, insignificant lives. Should she tell him? No, he wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet, while his heart was still so raw, while his hate still ran so deep. Maybe he did have real feelings for her, beyond what she'd coveted from him. Or maybe he was just vulnerable and seeking her closeness to drown his sorrows, the way she and Risman had used each other for so long. Whatever it was, it wouldn't be solved by sitting here, alone, while the cavern celebrated around them. Swallowing her unease, Mizira offered her hands to him. "Dance with me, and let's celebrate just being alive." Valen stared at her, then glanced around the courtyard. For a moment, she thought he was going to refuse. But then he took her hands and rose. "You know that night, I saw you with your tambourine, over by your wagon with Goody Ailry." A rock calcified in Mizira's throat, making it hard to breathe. How sweet it was to hear her mother's name on the lips of another. Further proof she really had been alive once, as if Elistrea's boon hadn't been enough. "I was dancing with Aster. Back then I thought when we grew up, I'd marry her." The smile he gave her belied the sad words he shared, as he hooked her arm in his. "Let's dance, Mizira, like before." A weight rolled from Mizira's shoulder as Valen escorted her into the courtyard. It was only after their second dance that she realized Risman had never found her, and yet she'd survived the situation without him. Thank you for listening to this episode of Forsaken by Shadows, written and produced by me, Sarah Danielle, And thank you to Tabletop Audio and Pixabay for the use of their work in this production. I feel like I don't ever mention this enough, but I am on Instagram, Substack, YouTube, and Wattpad, as well as Ko-Fi. Or Coffee. I still actually don't know how to say it. And did I say Wattpad or Wattpad? It's supposed to be Wattpad. I got schooled by my middle schoolers. Anyway, there's other ways to reach out and connect with me, and I would absolutely love to hear from you and what your favorite parts have been about this story. Tensions are starting to rise, and emotions are starting to bubble over. And it's only a matter of time before somebody breaks first. Make sure you're following along to find out what happens next. It was a Valen. His familiar scent of sandalwood and spice triggering her recognition faster than the feel of his arms around her back or the side of his golden hair tied into a knot at the back of his skull. That is a really long sentence. We're gonna try it without all the extras and see what we like better. It's okay. You're safe. A car is going by.